Welcome to the deep dive. Looks like we're tackling some big questions about power today.
Oh yeah, some really big ones.
You sent in a whole stack of readings from Noam Chomsky's Who Rules the World.
Definitely a thought-provoking choice.
So you're clearly ready to grapple with some serious issues about power.
Both on the global stage.
And closer to home.
Let's see what Chomsky has to say about who's really calling the shots, shall we?
Let's dive in.
One of the things that jumps out at me right away is how Chomsky tackles this huge question.
Who rules the world?
Right.
Like, there's no easy answer, right?
He acknowledges that from the start, there's no simple answer.
But he doesn't leave us hanging.
No, he doesn't.
He points to some very clear power imbalances.
Yeah, it does.
And he names names in terms of the key players.
The key players we need to be paying attention to.
And one of the things that grabs your attention right off the bat
Right away.
is his claim that the U.S. has basically been the top dog since World War II.
The dominant force on the world stage.
He argues that the U.S. has shaped global conversations on a massive scale.
Absolutely.
Affecting everything.
From the Israeli-Palestinian conflict
to how we approach climate change.
It's a pretty bold statement when you think about it.
It is a bold statement.
And what's even more interesting is that he argues that this power,
this dominance.
Yeah, this dominance.
Isn't static.
It's not a fixed thing at all.
He suggests that it's actually been in decline.
Yeah. U.S. power has been declining in recent years.
And shifting to?
Shifting in part to what he calls a de facto world government.
Okay, hold on now.
Now, before you jump to conclusions.
Yeah, before we get into conspiracy theory.
Right. He's not talking about some shadowy group pulling strings behind the scenes.
Yeah.
What he means is the growing influence of leading capitalist powers.
Okay.
Think the G7.
Okay.
And big institutions like the International Monetary Fund.
So it's less about one country calling all the shots.
Right.
And more about this complex network of power.
Exactly. It's not a simple answer, just like Chomsky said at the beginning.
And this brings us to another fascinating part of his analysis.
Yeah.
The role of intellectuals.
Chomsky divides them into two camps.
Oh, this is interesting.
Those who serve to uphold existing power structures.
Okay.
And those who challenge them.
I like that.
You know, the ones who rock the boat.
He uses some really vivid historical examples to illustrate this point.
He does.
Like, he talks about the intellectuals who were totally gung-ho for their own countries during World War I.
Yeah, totally convinced their cause was righteous.
Oh, totally.
Blind to the propaganda and nationalistic fervor.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even the smartest people can get swept up in the tide.
Absolutely, even the best and brightest.
And Chomsky contrasts these figures with others.
Yes.
Like Randolph Bourne.
Right.
Who dared to question why we were even fighting the war in the first place.
Challenging the motives behind the war.
He also talks about the Trilateral Commission.
Oh, yeah.
This group of influential scholars and policymakers.
They were really worried about what they saw as an excess of democracy.
Wait, an excess of democracy?
Yeah, in the 1960s.
So they were concerned about marginalized groups demanding more rights.
More rights.
A bigger piece of the pie.
More say in how things are run.
It's interesting how they labeled these groups special interests.
It's like they were some kind of threat to the established order.
Almost like they were the bad guys.
It makes you wonder whose interests were really being served, doesn't it?
It does.
Chomsky points out that the Trilateral Commission conveniently overlooked a key group of people.
Who?
One's Adam Smith called the Masters of Mankind.
Who was Adam Smith again?
Oh, he's considered the father of modern economics.
Okay.
And by Masters of Mankind, he meant the wealthy elite.
The super rich.
Who have a disproportionate amount of influence on government policy.
So he's suggesting that real power might not lie with the people we elect.
Not necessarily.
But with those who control the money.
The ones who bankroll the campaigns.
The ones who operate behind the scenes.
Precisely. And now get ready for this.
For what?
Chomsky doesn't pull any punches when he talks about international terrorism.
This should be interesting.
He argues that the U.S. itself fits the definition of a leading terrorist state.
Whoa, okay, that's a bold statement.
It is.
How does he support that?
He uses some very specific examples.
Like?
The U.S. support for the Indonesian invasion of East Timor in 1975.
Okay.
The bombing of that television station in Serbia in 1999.
The RTS station.
That's the one. And Reagan's support for the South African apartheid regime.
These are some heavy topics.
They are.
He's really shining a light on the darker side of U.S. foreign policy.
Definitely challenging the conventional narrative.
He also draws a parallel between 9/11
Yeah.
and the U.S.-backed coup in Chile.
That happened on September 11, 1973.
It's like he's asking us to look at the impact of both events side by side.
To confront some uncomfortable truths about how we define terrorism.
whose actions we label as terrorism.
Exactly, and that leads right into his critique of American exceptionalism.
This belief that the U.S. is somehow superior to other nations.
And operates on a higher moral plane.
Right.
But he doesn't just throw that term around.
No, he doesn't.
He really dismantles the myth.
By examining things like
a conquest of the West.
And the treatment of Native Americans.
He points out that even those uniquely American traits,
like what?
Individualism and enterprise,
the things we celebrate,
played a key role in the displacement of Native Americans.
In the whole project of settler colonialism.
It forces us to reconsider that narrative of progress and greatness.
It really makes you think about the cost of that so-called progress.
And to drive this point home, he delves into the CIA's torture paradigm.
The CIA and torture.
He highlights its long and disturbing history.
It's a pretty dark chapter.
It is.
The sheer amount of money poured into developing these techniques.
$1 billion budget.
Wow.
And these techniques later resurfaced in places like Abu Ghraib.
It exposes this pattern of disregard for human rights.
In the name of national security.
He's saying these actions not only go against American ideals,
they undermine the very foundation of a just and equitable society.
And to really illustrate this point, he digs into some specific case studies of U.S. intervention.
Interventions that you might not have heard about?
Yeah, the ones that don't always make the headlines.
Like the case of the Vincennes?
The Vincennes, what was that?
A U.S. warship that shot down an Iranian civilian aircraft.
Oh, wow.
In 1988.
Tragically killing all 290 people on board.
It's a chilling reminder of the real cost of military actions.
And miscalculations.
It makes you think about how narratives are shaped.
About whose actions are scrutinized more on the world stage.
Exactly. He contrasts the lack of outrage over the Vincennes incident with the global condemnation that followed the downing of MH17 over Ukraine.
Allegedly by Russian-backed separatists.
It raises questions about double standards.
And how power dynamics influence international responses.
Absolutely. Another case study he focuses on is the U.S. bombing of Laos.
During the Vietnam War.
He highlights the sheer scale of this bombing campaign,
which is often overlooked in the mainstream narrative of the war.
He draws on Fred Brampman's reporting to expose the reality on the ground.
The discrepancy between the official story and what actually happened to civilians.
It's a powerful reminder that history is often written by the victors.
He also delves into Obama's reestablishment of diplomatic relations with Cuba.
Oh, yeah.
Highlighting this irony in Obama's claim to have supported democracy and human rights on the island.
Through decades of isolationist policies.
So he's suggesting these policies weren't really about promoting freedom and democracy.
Not really.
They were more about maintaining U.S. dominance in the region.
In punishing Cuba for defying the U.S.
That's a pretty provocative interpretation.
It is, and this leads us to Chomsky's view of American decline.
Okay, American decline.
He acknowledges that U.S. global power has diminished since World War II.
But
he's careful to point out that this decline is relative.
Relative? What does that mean?
It means the U.S. is still the most powerful country in the world.
Okay.
But its power is not as absolute as it once was.
So other powers are rising.
Other countries are gaining influence.
And he introduces this concept of the plutonomy.
The plutonomy.
What is that?
This idea that a tiny fraction of the population holds immense wealth and power.
While the majority struggles.
Exactly. And he connects this concentration of wealth...
To what?
To the concentration of political power.
Meaning
that laws and policies are often designed to benefit the wealthy.
Furthering this cycle of inequality.
It's a self-perpetuating system.
And he also brings up these two really pressing issues.
Which one?
The nuclear threat.
Right.
And environmental catastrophe.
Two of the biggest challenges facing humanity.
He reminds us that we've been living under the shadow of nuclear annihilation for over 70 years.
What he calls the nuclear weapons era.
It's chilling when you think about it.
It is. We've almost normalized the possibility of our own destruction.
And then he tells this incredible story.
Oh, I love this story.
About Vasily Arkhipov.
A Soviet naval officer.
Who most likely prevented a nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Talk about a close call.
It really makes you realize how fragile our existence is.
And how much we depend on the actions of individuals.
And then he connects this threat,
the nuclear threat,
to the equally urgent issue of climate change.
He emphasizes how critical it is to address climate change now.
Not tomorrow, not next year now.
He even mentions a study from NASA.
About
the accelerated melting of a Greenland glacier.
showing that things are escalating faster than we might realize.
Much faster.
So it's not just separate crises.
No, they're all interconnected.
And feeding into each other.
And he brings us back to that central question.
Who rules the world?
But he adds another layer of complexity.
Which is?
What principles and values rule the world?
It's not just about who's in charge.
It's about the ideas that shape our actions.
He argues that the dominant principles right now,
the ones driving our current system,
are those of corporations and powerful financial institutions.
Their relentless pursuit of profit.
Even at the expense of future generations and the environment.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
But he doesn't leave us without hope.
What does he offer?
He believes in the power of citizen activism.
Of holding those in power accountable.
Of demanding a better future.
He's urging us to be active participants in shaping our own destiny.
Not passive bystanders.
It's a call to action.
It is.
All right, let's take a moment to just process all that for a minute.
Yeah, there was a lot to unpack.
We covered some dense territory there.
Really dense.
From how power and wealth are concentrated.
To the role of intellectuals.
And the dangers of American exceptionalism.
That's a lot to wrap your head around.
What's striking me is how Chomsky can connect all these seemingly disparate events.
He does.
From the Vietnam War to the U.S. relationship with Israel.
And bring them back to these overarching themes.
Of power.
Ideology.
And the struggle for justice.
It's like he's weaving a tapestry.
And these are the threads.
It's like he's giving us this new lens to view the world through.
He's not just presenting facts.
He's challenging us to question the narratives we've been told.
To see the connections between seemingly isolated events.
To think critically about the world around us.
And he's not afraid to criticize even those we consider heroes or allies.
He doesn't hold back.
He's constantly pushing us to think for ourselves.
To consider the perspectives of those who are often marginalized or silenced. And that's one of the things I find so refreshing about his work.
Me too.
He doesn't offer easy answers or simple solutions.
He makes us grapple with these complex issues.
He forces us to confront uncomfortable truths.
And think deeply about our own role in shaping the world.
It's not a passive experience reading Chomsky.
So moving forward, how can we apply Chomsky's insights?
How can we use what we've learned?
To better understand the world and our place in it.
That's the key question, isn't it?
What are some of the key takeaways we should be thinking about?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me
is
his emphasis on information.
On how information is controlled.
He argues that those in power manipulate information to maintain their control.
It's like knowledge is power.
Exactly.
But who controls that knowledge?
Who shapes the narratives that we consume?
And Chomsky urges us to be skeptical consumers of information.
To question what we're told.
To seek out alternative perspectives.
Don't just accept the dominant narrative.
Right.
Dig deeper, question everything, and form your own conclusions.
I like that.
Be your own investigator.
And this ties directly into his critique of the media.
Media.
He argues that the media often serves the interests of the powerful.
Rather than truly informing the public.
He wants us to be aware of the biases and agendas that shape the news.
To actively seek out diverse perspectives.
So it's about being media literate.
Media literate.
Understanding how the media works.
How it operates.
Being able to critically analyze the information it presents.
It's a crucial skill in today's world.
But it goes deeper than that.
It does.
He's also saying we're not just passive consumers of information.
We're not just sponges soaking it all up.
We have a responsibility to engage with it critically.
To think for ourselves. To evaluate the information we encounter.
And to use it to inform our actions.
Our actions in the real world.
So how do we translate that into action?
That's the big question.
What can we do as individuals
in our daily lives
to challenge these systems of power
to make a difference
and work towards a more just and equitable world?
Chomsky puts a lot of emphasis on citizen activism.
On getting involved.
On participating in the political process.
He believes that we have a responsibility to hold those in power accountable.
To demand better from our leaders.
To make our voices heard.
It's about recognizing our own power as citizens.
And using it.
To influence policy and create change.
Even if it feels like a small act.
Even a small act can make a difference.
And he also emphasizes the importance of collective action.
Of working together.
Of building solidarity with others.
Who share our values and goals.
He sees the power of social movements.
To challenge the status quo.
To push for progressive change.
He sees hope in the growing global awareness of these issues.
And the rise of social movements.
Demanding greater equality and justice.
He points to movements like the Arab Spring.
Occupy Wall Street.
As imperfect as they may be.
They demonstrate the power of people demanding change.
So it's about finding those points of connection.
Finding common ground.
Building coalitions.
Working together to create a more just and equitable world.
And recognizing that this is a long-term struggle.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
There will be setbacks.
Challenges along the way.
But we have to remain committed to the fight for justice and equality.
We can't give up.
Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to something else Chomsky talks about.
What's that?
The war on terror.
Oh, yeah. A very loaded term.
He argues that the war on terror, which began after 9/11,
has been a catastrophic failure.
Leading to more violence and instability.
Instead of less.
He's especially critical of the tactics that have been used.
Like what?
Military force.
Drone strikes.
He sees them as counterproductive and morally wrong.
He believes these tactics have alienated populations.
Created more enemies.
And fueled the very terrorism they're supposed to be fighting against.
It's a powerful critique of the dominant narrative surrounding the war on terror.
It challenges us to rethink our approach to security.
And global stability.
To question whether the methods we're using are actually making us safer.
Or creating more problems in the long run.
And this leads to another crucial point Chomsky makes.
Which is?
The role of the media in perpetuating these narratives.
The media's role in shaping public opinion.
He argues that the media often acts as a mouthpiece for powerful interests.
Rather than providing objective information.
He critiques the media's tendency to frame events in a way that supports the status quo.
And to ignore dissenting voices.
He says this is especially evident in the coverage of foreign policy.
Where the perspectives of those most affected by U.S. actions are often left out.
Or distorted.
He sees this as a form of propaganda.
Propaganda that reinforces existing power structures.
And limits the possibility for real debate and change.
It's a reminder that we can't just passively consume the news.
We have to be critical thinkers.
To question what we're told.
And to seek out alternative sources of information.
Now, Chomsky also takes aim at economic globalization.
Globalization.
And the institutions that govern it.
Like the World Trade Organization.
The International Monetary Fund.
Those big players in the global economy.
He argues that these institutions have been designed to benefit wealthy countries and corporations.
At the expense of developing nations and working people around the world.
He criticizes their promotion of free trade agreements.
Agreements that often undermine labor rights.
Environmental protections.
And local economies.
He argues that these policies have led to greater inequality.
More exploitation.
And a concentration of wealth in the hands of a global elite.
It's a powerful critique of the dominant economic model.
And he calls for a more just and sustainable system.
A system that prioritizes human needs over corporate profits.
A system that's more equitable and fair for everyone.
Exactly. Now, before we move on to our final thoughts,
okay,
let's touch on one more topic that Chomsky explores.
What's that?
The role of intellectual dissent.
Intellectual dissent.
He believes that intellectuals have a responsibility to speak truth to power.
To challenge the dominant narratives.
That often justify injustice and oppression.
He sees this as a crucial role in any society.
Especially in a democracy.
Where freedom of speech and thought are supposedly valued.
He argues that intellectual dissent is essential for holding those in power accountable.
For creating a more just and equitable society. He encourages us to be critical thinkers.
To question authority.
To never take things for granted.
To always be pushing for a better world.
It's a powerful reminder that we all have a role to play.
In shaping the future.
Wow, we've really been digging deep into Chomsky's work, haven't we?
We have. It's been quite a journey.
From those structures of power.
To how the media can be manipulated.
The impact of globalization.
And what Chomsky sees as the decline of American power.
One of the things that I keep coming back to is Chomsky's use of history.
Oh, yeah. His historical perspective.
He's always connecting the past to the present.
Showing how the struggles we face today
are echoes of struggles from centuries ago.
Like he's giving us a roadmap.
Showing us how the fight for justice and equality never really ends.
They just take on different forms.
And like he says, if you want to understand the present, you got to understand the past.
Exactly. He gives the example of the Magna Carta.
This landmark document.
In the fight for individual rights.
It shows how even that was undermined.
By the rise of the market economy.
By the forces of capitalism.
And he also talks about the Charter of the Forest.
Which was all about protecting those common lands.
From being privatized.
And he shows how that was chipped away at, too.
Eroded by the forces of capitalism.
So even those hard-fought victories.
For justice and equality.
They can be fragile.
Susceptible to those who want to concentrate power and wealth.
So the fight for a just world never ends.
It's a constant struggle.
It requires us to always be vigilant.
Always be ready to take action.
He also argues that this battle for power
Isn't just about who controls governments.
or armies,
It's about who controls the narrative.
those stories we tell ourselves about the world,
About history,
about who we are.
what we're capable of.
He's really critical of how those in power
Use propaganda
and misinformation
to manipulate public opinion.
to justify their actions.
Like he's saying, don't believe everything you hear.
Think for yourself.
Question everything.
He's a big advocate for media literacy,
Being a critical consumer of information.
recognizing the biases that shape the news
To see through the spin and manipulation.
to get to the truth.
Seek out alternative perspectives.
Challenge the dominant narrative.
And think for yourself.
Become an active participant,
In shaping the narrative.
not just a passive consumer.
He sees this as so important for a healthy democracy.
So we've talked about the challenges,
The systems of power.
the need for critical thinking.
And action.
But I want to touch on something inspiring about Chomsky.
What's that?
His belief in human agency.
Even when facing overwhelming forces.
He still believes we have the power
To choose
to resist.
and to create a better world.
He doesn't let us off the hook.
He says we have a responsibility to use our voices.
To work for change.
This belief in our ability to make choices
To shape the world.
is essential for any real change to happen.
It's recognizing that we're not powerless.
We have choices.
Our action
No matter how small,
can have a ripple effect.
create a larger impact.
Embrace your own power.
Use it to create a more just future.
And remember, you're not alone.
There are people all over the world.
Fighting for the same things?
Equality.
A better world.
Connect with those people.
Build solidarity.
Amplify your voices together.
That's how we overcome these challenges.
That's how we create a more humane world.
It's a powerful message of hope
Amidst the complexity,
and darkness.
a reminder that even facing obstacles, we can make a difference.
Our actions matter.
We can shape our own destiny.
Well, that was quite a deep dive into Chomsky's world.
It was, wasn't it?
He gives us a lot to think about.
Whether you agree with him or not.
He makes us look beyond the headlines
Question what we're told.
and think critically about power
About justice.
and the human condition.
What stood out to you from this deep dive
What will you take away from this
and apply to your own life?
to your own understanding of the world?
We'd love to hear your thoughts.